Hi, and welcome to another lesson on cryptography. In today's lesson, we are going to be identifying two reasons why cryptography fits into our history. We are going to learn a couple of tricks that can be used to break ciphers, especially if we don't know the key. I'm going to teach you a new cipher called Pigpen, and by the end of this lesson you should be able to encode and decode using Pigpen. And finally, we are going to look and see how cryptography fits into the modern world, and you are going to be able to look and identify 3 different ways in which cryptography is used today. So let's start off with a history lesson. Well, many years ago, in the time of Julius Caesar, cryptography existed. We learnt about his Caesar cipher in the last lesson. He used it to send messages to his troops on the front line. Okay? This way, by using a cipher, it meant that nobody else could intercept the message. Now, there is a link below this video which you can use to make your own Caesar cipher wheel, as you can see in the picture. I've got one similar just here, and we're going to be using this to decipher some of the ciphers that we've got here today. So let's have a quick reminder on how the Caesar cipher works. If you notice, you've got a code here. Okay, you'll recognize this from last week. It's the same one that we used then. And it says the key is a left shift of 2. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is create our plain text alphabet. So that's just an alphabet in the way that we know it from A through to Z. When we look at the left shift, we look at the ciphertext. This is where we need to shift this row, so the second alphabet, to the left 2 places. Okay. What you'll notice now is that A and C line up, but that makes A and B a little bit redundant at the front here. However, there's no letters corresponding with Y and Z. So A and B need to move to the end of the alphabet and join up again. So it's basically like the alphabet starting again. But in this particular case, A becomes C, B becomes D, and so forth. We have shifted by 2 places. Now that works the same if we use a cipher wheel. Okay, the outside row is our plain text. This is used for our actual code. The inside row is our ciphertext. So if we pop the A at the top of the plain text and we swivel the inside row around until A matches up with the top A. So at the moment they are perfectly in line. If we want to left shift that 2 places, we go wrong way, 1, 2. Okay, so what you can now see is that A has become C, in the same way as on our listed version A has become C. Now, using either of these ciphers, you will be able to decrypt that particular key. So, on the one on the screen, if we look at E, so E is our first one, we find E along the bottom row, we found it there, and it has become C. In the same way as if we find E here, it has also become C. Okay, giving us a C as our first letter. The next one in our list is C. So this would be this first letter here, and we can see that C here matches up with the A here as well. So we've got A. And we can continue to do this, so we've got V along the bottom, which is here, and that would give us T. If we find V, which is here, you'll see this gives us T as well. Okay, so if we continue to do this, we will find that we have got pen has disappeared. We have got O, which has become M. We have got Q, which has become O. We have got U, which has become S. And then finally we have G, which has become E. And if we have a look here, we will see that G here is E as well. Follow that all the way through, we will find it says Cadmus College. Now, either way of doing it using a Caesar cipher is absolutely fine. If you make yourself a wheel, you can use that, or if you just write the alphabet down and then move the alphabet below it, the ciphertext, either way of doing that is absolutely fine. Okay. So, how else? Let's have a look at the Enigma machine. This is another famous wartime substitution cipher. It's famously known as the Enigma code and was used by the Germans during World War II, and it was thought to be unbreakable. Now, there was a man called Alan Turing, and he and his team at Bletchley Park designed a machine called the Bomber, which eventually broke the code and helped to end the war. I think they estimate that about 2 years earlier than it would have done naturally, saving millions and millions of lives. Now, the Enigma machine worked using quite a complex process. There were, for example, 5 cogs. Each of those cogs had multiple settings, and depending on which cog you used in which setting depended on how the algorithm worked to give letters or substitute letters. And the Navy used a further encryption, which is the one that's on the picture at the front here, which had the leads on the front, swapping some of those encryptions over. So it was really thought to be an unbreakable cipher. However, most ciphers, most encryptions are breakable. It's how long it takes that becomes the issue. So let's have a look at some faults. If we go back to the Caesar cipher, okay, we know there is only 26 letters in the alphabet. If you gave me a code and it was a left shift of 1, A would become B. If it was a left shift of 2, A would become C, we would have D, E, F, and eventually we would get all the way around, let's go all the way around, to A being Z, and then we would start again. A would probably never be itself because that would be a completely pointless cipher because you would just have the message. So what you could do if it was a simple Caesar cipher is you could do what's called a brute force hack and check every single possible output. Okay, so you could go through all of those. There is only 25 possibilities, so it won't take too long. The Enigma machine was a lot more complex, like I just described. Excuse me. And it had one very minor fault. Its main fault was a little bit like the Caesar cipher. A letter could never ever be itself. A letter could be absolutely anything else. It seemed quite random unless you knew the settings of all the cogs and all the leads. But a letter could never be itself. Now, because it's quite complex, that in itself is quite minor, unless you have a key word that you could use to compare the daily settings to. Because not only was this complex, but the settings on the Enigma machine was changed every single day. And this is where the Germans made a mistake. Every morning, they would start every transmission, so the first transmission every morning, with the weather report. And the weather report itself was started with the German of weather report. So when this was finally worked out and the English finally realized this, they could use the word weather report and the minor fault in the Enigma code where a letter could never be itself to work out what the settings were for that day. However, every morning they had to start that process over and over again, which is where the bomber came in. Eventually the bomber could do it within 3 hours. Okay, so how could you break the code without having to do brute force hacks and without having 3 hours in a bomber machine? Well, there are some little things that you could look for in a cipher. So, if we look at this particular cipher here, as you can see, it is made up of a word with a single letter, and then a 4-letter word, and then a single letter word, and a 4-letter word. Okay. This 4-letter word has got quite a lot of different letters in, so that's not really going to help us at this point. This one here has got a little bit of a clue in as well, but what I'm really interested in at this stage is this one and this one. Okay, so if you notice with those 2 letters, they are completely different, and here's the reason why that is important. Because there are only 2 single letter words in the English language. You either have I or a. Okay, so it's either one of those 2, and that's the only options we have. Now, if these letters were the same, it would mean that they're both either I or a. But because they're different, it makes it even easier, because that is really all we need to check. We'll just need to check those 2. Now, in this 4-letter word, this last 4-letter word, there's something else that's quite unique about it. And that would be that it has 2 letters following each other which are the same. So words with double letters in them. Again, there's only a limited number of double-lettered words in the English language. The most common ones are double O, double T, double L, and double E. So those would be good ones to start with. So what we could do is check which one of these letters here, so either P or H, is an I, to make sure that the double letter word works out as being a legitimate double letter word. So let's give that a go. If we assume that P is the letter I, okay, so we'll find the letter I on the outside and we'll line that up with P. Okay, so if we look at that now, the other letter, which was H, if we find H, can't find H through here now, H lines up with the letter A. So that makes perfect sense. So it's I and A. What about the V's? Let's have a look. Well, the V's are here, and they line up with the letter O, which would mean that that double V is in fact a double O. Let's see what would have happened if we had tried H first. So if I put H as the letter I, you'll notice that the letter P, which has now moved to here, is an R, and the letter V, which has now moved around here somewhere, has become an X. So that was not a good option. So I think we were quite right in saying that P was in fact, where's P gone now? P was in fact the letter I, and so forth. Okay, so based on that, let's see if we can decipher this particular code. So we've said that P is the letter I, we've said that H is the letter A, and we have said that V was the letter O. Okay, let's look at the rest of the letters now then. So if we find Y is going to be here. So Y becomes the letter R. L becomes the letter E. H becomes the letter A, because we've got that already. We found that out earlier, so A. K becomes the letter, where's K gone now? Can't see where K is. There we go. K becomes the letter D. I becomes the letter B. And R becomes the letter K. So the sentence reads, I read a book, which is a perfectly ordinary sentence made up of this. And we found that out without having to know what the shift or the key was. Okay, what about if it wasn't quite so simple? What if we didn't have two single letter words that were different, so it were easy for us to find out what it was? What if we had this sentence? Okay, again, we can look at this. We could possibly hard hack it, so, or brute force hack it. So if I look at A, let's find A again. A is there, swivel this around until A is at the top. So A is never going to be A, so we could change A to B. If A was B, okay, we'd start looking, yes, that would make A, for our first word, Z. It would make O and N, so that's ZN, and it would make L a K. So that's ZNK for the first word, not a word. So we know that's not right. We could move on to the next one and so forth and so forth. But in fact, we could limit this to only checking 3 letters. So let's see how that works. First, we need to know what are the most commonly used letters in the English alphabet, or in the English language, should I say. So you can see on this chart that E is the most commonly used letter in all of our words, followed by T and A. So if we have a look at that sentence, and I've counted them for you, you can see that A appears 3 times, L appears 4 times, and Y appears 4 times. So it'd be safe to assume that either this letter or this letter or this letter is in fact represented or representing an E. So we'll start at the beginning. Okay, so if we again assume that A, where are we? A is representing an E. So let's put E at the top and pop A round to E. Okay. Let's just clear this again. Okay. So if we were to say that A represented E, that would make this an E. Okay. Which would make O, where's O gone now? O an S, and L, which is down here, it would make L a P. Is it a P? M-N-O-P. Yep, L a P. Okay, well, to me, that's not a legitimate word. So let's get rid of that one. So that one is not E. Okay, so we'll stick with E again, and this time we are going to put an L. Where's L gone now? An L under E. So we're going to assume that the letter L is in fact an E, which would make us say that A became a T, O would be a H, so you can see O is up here, that's a H, and we've said L is an E. That gives us the word the. That would make this word here the word the as well. Okay, looking a little bit more legitimate. So we can put a question mark against that one. Now, rather than checking to see whether or not Y is in fact E, what I'll do is check the next word, because the next word is also only 3 letters long. So if we look at J, J becomes a C, H becomes an A, and Y down here becomes an R. So what I now have is the car, and the again. Now I would say that what we've done is we have solved the key by just checking this one and this one based on the fact that E is the most common letter in the English language. Okay, and if you're interested, the statement there said the car turned the corner. Okay, so were ciphers only used for war? Well, the simple answer is no. No, they weren't. They were used to hide secrets. Okay, there were lots and lots, especially in the olden days, there were lots of secret societies that liked to keep their information away from prying eyes. Bear in mind, they had to send their messages using carrier pigeon or messenger boys, and these were quite easily intercepted. So they had to find a way of making their messages secure, and they used ciphers for this. During the Crusades, the Knight Templars protected the Christians that were visiting the Holy Land, and they often had to send their messages between themselves and to the site and backwards and forwards and to the temple, and not the temple, sorry, the church, and back to Rome, etc. And they did it using a special code that used symbols rather than letters. But it was still just a substitution cipher. Later on, the secret society of the Freemasons took on the same symbolic cipher, and they used it to pass secret messages and things again between lodge leaders, as well as to write down all the information from their secret meetings. If you have a look at this picture on the slide, you can see that down here there is in fact a secret code. Here there is a secret code, and here there is a secret code. Now that is written in the cipher which we now know as Pigpen. Okay, and we know that this is a Freemason gravestone because the symbol up here is the symbol of the Freemasons. So using the Pigpen cipher, if you had the correct key again, you would be able to work out what it says on this gravestone. Okay, so let's pause the video now and make some notes, and then after that we will learn how to use the Pigpen cipher. You do need these notes for today's quiz. Okay, well, I hope you've made some notes and you've got all of this written down. So, the Pigpen cipher and how that works. To start with, we need these two symbols, and it is probably the reason it is called the Pigpen cipher, because of the shapes. Now, once you've got the two shapes, you have to populate it with the relevant letters. And as you can see, in each of the sections, okay, there are 2 letters, and they are differentiated by one being plain and one having this dot underneath it. Okay, so if you wanted to write a symbol that symbolized A, you would write down its position in this key. So in fact, A would become this symbol. If you wanted to write down J, for example, you still have this symbol, but J has then got the dot below it. So J would become this symbol, but with a dot, so that we know that we're looking at the letter J. B would be this symbol replicating the shape of its position. K would be the same symbol with the dotting. Okay, and that works the same for this one here. S, for example, would be a symbol like that, which again is replicating its position within this image. W would be in the same symbol, but with a dot. So that's S, and that's W. Okay, let's do T, for example. So T would be this symbol, showing us that it's in this position. X would be the same symbol, but with a dot in, and so forth. I think you get the general idea. Okay, so if we look at this piece of text at the top of the screen, we need to be able to decipher it by identifying the symbols and their position. So this symbol here reflects this bit. It doesn't have a dot, so therefore it is relating to the T. Okay, we have this symbol here, which is this one here. Again, no dot, so this is H. Okay, finally we've got the symbol up here, again no dot, so we've got this one, it'll be the letter I, and we've got the V shape, which is this one, no dot, so it's the letter S, making the word this. Okay, I'm going to go through the rest. We've got this shape here, again no dot, so we know already that that's here and represents an I. The V, no dot, we know represents an S. We can see that by these two here being exactly the same. Okay, can we see? We've got I down here again, and so on. Okay, now here we've got one that's got a dot. So we are looking at this shape with a dot, so it's a P. Okay, we can see we've got the same thing here, so we can pop our P there as well. We've got, let's get rid of that one, let's put it there. Okay, we've got this one, which is the same shape as the P, but without the dot, so we're looking at the G. Here we have got the square. Now the square relates to the central part of this diagram. No dot, so that becomes an E. The next one's with a dot, which becomes an N. So the sentence here says, this is pig pen. Okay, so it's about looking at the actual shapes that we've got going on. Okay, now it's your turn. Grab yourself a pen and paper, or pause the video first, then grab yourself some pen and paper and see if you can decode this word. Oh, sorry, encode, not decode. If you can encode this word. If you're stuck, I'll give you a little bit of help. The first letter we have is C, which is up here. Okay, so we've got our C, it has no dot, so our first letter would be C. Now pause the video and try and encode the rest of it. Okay, well, I'm hoping you've given that a good go. Let's put the answer up and see if you got it right. There you go. So we have C-H-O, lost my thought, that's C-O-L-A-T-E, chocolate, written in pig pen. Okay, this time I'm going to show you a pig pen cipher, and I want you to try and decode it. Pause the video and try and decode that. If you're stuck, I'll give you a little bit of a clue. This first letter here refers to this section of the cipher, it has a dot, so it's a P. Pause the video and try again. Okay, well, I'm hoping that you've given that a good go, and the word you should have found was peanuts. If you did that, very, very well done. Okay, back to making notes. Can you please make a note of this key? You will need it for the quiz later on. It'd also be fun if you did encode a message and showed somebody at home how to use it. Okay, so I'm hoping you've paused the video now and you've taken notes of the actual key itself. Now, just to let you know, not every key would look this way. Different lodges or different groups of people would have a different key. Different levels of people would have a different key, and so forth. So there were ways that this was made a little bit more complex. The one that we're using was the one that was most commonly used across the whole of the Freemasons for making their everyday notes. So, how exactly is cryptography used today? Is it still relevant? Let's find out. Okay, so messages are still sent using secret codes. Nowadays we call it end-to-end encryption. Some of you who, if you use WhatsApp, will have noticed that it often says these messages are now secured with end-to-end encryption. Now, what does that exactly mean? So let's go through that. As you can see, we've got our little guys down the bottom here, and they are sending each other a message. This first message has been sent using a Caesar cipher. It's been on the screen for quite a while, so I'm hoping that you have seen that there are maybe some clues that you could have looked at already. It is only a simple Caesar cipher. It's got a left shift of 3, and when the message is decoded, it says, "Meet me in the garden." Now, if you think about it, it would have been quite easy to decode that message because there were those clues that we looked at earlier. So how can we make this more difficult? Well, for us, in a very simplistic way, there's sort of a 3-step process. Our first process is where the computers have to check each other's ID. They have to make sure that they are who they say they are. And once this is done, both computers will receive a certificate of authentication. Okay? The next step would be to send a message. Now, the message is sent along with a digital signature. The digital signature has to be decoded using a special key, which is hidden. And once that is decoded, a private key, which is only known to the receiver, is able to decode this message. And as you can see from the message, it is very different to the type of message that was encoded using either a Caesar cipher or even a Pigpen cipher. Now, if we send through the private key, that message can be decoded, and again, it simply meets me in the garden, but much more complex to decode. So, time to make some notes again. The 3 steps to improve our security was authentication. This is when 2 machines have to confirm who they are, that they say who they are before they can receive any messages. And then this is done through an authentication certificate. We need to check the integrity. The data sent should be the same as the data received. This is done by encrypting the data with a digital signature. Now, that digital signature has to be decrypted before the message can be accessed. And finally, we're looking at confidentiality. Only the authorized recipient who is authenticated that they are the right person, who has had the integrity of the message checked, can finally decrypt the message using a unique private key. Pause the video now and make a note of those 3 steps. Okay, well done guys. Right, that's the end of the lesson. Can you please go onto the VLE and complete today's quiz? Have a lovely rest of your weekend.